absolute betrayal of the three treacherous captains set up a lot of potentially dramatic conflicts to come in Bleach after the end of the Soul Society arc. I've talked about how smart it was to give those captains some real personal relationships that were shattered because it was almost Kubo making a silent promise as a storyteller that those connections would come back in big ways to pay off the heartbreaking reactions to the defections of people that were once loved and respected. And now, Kubo is delivering on what he set up. Here, we have a battle deeply rooted in what was seemingly a beautiful friendship and in what was believed to be genuine admiration. But it turns out some people might have been blinded to the truth. So let's get into what may be one of my favorite confrontations in the series, which shocks me to say honestly, because at the start of this arc, I liked Komamura well enough, and I thought Tozen was really interesting after his surprise betrayal, and I was also pretty indifferent to Hisagi until very recently. And yet, these three characters and the dynamic between them are responsible for providing one of my absolute favorite parts of Bleach so far. This was nothing short of incredible. There's a lot to get into, so bear with me. I've been excited to see Komamura face Tozen ever since he was shouting at him at the end of the Soul Society arc, and I wasn't disappointed by where that now led. Given how well these combatants know each other, there's obviously a feeling of familiarity between them. They all know each other's tricks and their capabilities, but I love that Kubo immediately throws a wrench into that. Our two heroic Soul Reapers might not know Tozen nearly as well as they think, and that's quickly established when Tozen wants to go all out and Komamura mistakenly believes that that means they should use their Bankais, but that's not what Tozen means. He just laughs that idea off and thinks his own Bankai is a waste of time, which is kind of a real shame, honestly, because I loved his sensory deprivation Bankai. It was awesome, and I wish he used it more, especially now, but anyway. And then Tozen holds his hand up to his face, and I immediately freaked out, because by this point, this is a very recognizable gesture for the readers. We've seen Ichigo do this to summon his Hollow Mask, and we've seen the Visor do the same, and that's the genius of this reveal. Hollow Masks have been firmly established, and we think we know where all of them are and who their wearers are, only to see this. Tozen holifies and dons his own Hollow Mask. And I should have suspected that the trio of traitors would utilize holification. After all, Aizen created the Visored by forcing masks to form on each of them, so he knows the ins and outs of holification. That has been incredibly well established by this point. I don't know why it didn't occur to me that this would be the case, but it just never did. I never even thought, like, oh yeah, of course, Gin and Tozen, they're gonna have hollow masks, right? They're probably just like the Visor. Didn't even occur to me. Not once. I don't know why. It makes complete sense, and it just slipped right under my radar, I guess. But again, it absolutely checks out, because why wouldn't Aizen's Soul Reapers make use of something like this? We've seen how much more powerful it makes the Visored, so of course these guys would be able to do it too. Aizen would want to use that. I'm just dumb. That's all. So Tozen's mask forms, and this design is awesome. It's sleek and intimidating, but Tozen usually hits with his designs, honestly. He's always got great outfits. Maybe I'll do a Tozen attire ranking at the end of this video. We'll see. But for this one, his mask is scary because there isn't a face on it at all, at least not initially. It's just kind of creepy, and unlike most masks that we've seen so far, there's nothing on it except one single line running vertically down the middle. To me, it not only emphasizes his blindness, but also symbolizes how he's kind of trying to move beyond expressing himself at all. He just wants to be pure, unbiased justice more than anything else. It's not about expressions or feelings, it's about being an instrument of judgment. And honestly, vengeance, but that's debatable with him. Him and I would probably argue about that, but it's kind of true. Komamura and Hisagi are a bit horrified of what's become of Tozen, but he doesn't want to hear it. He instead questions why Ichigo is respected for having the same kind of power, while he is now despised for it. But I loved how Komamura makes it clear that it's not about the holification, but the context around it. From how it seems, Tozen chose to have this happen to him, to go through the holification process, while Ichigo didn't have a choice in the matter. It was forced upon him unknowingly. But an interesting thing of note from all of this, if this is the case and Tozen did indeed choose this and volunteer to be given this power, that would mean that Tozen seems to be the first character to willingly allow himself to undergo holification. At least, like I said, that's definitely how it appears, but it's not confirmed. But that's how it seems. That's the general vibe I got, was that like Tozen volunteered for this. The Visor did not, Ichigo did not. Tozen was totally on board. I do wonder if Gin has also gained a hollow mask. Probably. Why wouldn't he? Aizen probably has one too. I can't wait to see them. I really liked this whole exchange because Tozen couldn't understand why it was wrong for a Soul Reaper to gain hollow powers, completely blind to why Komamura is upset. He doesn't understand that Komamura isn't mad about the powers. He's mad about the fact that part of gaining those powers meant turning on his friends to gain strength. It's about choice, not about the kind of power he wields. He gave up his life and his position and his friends to join Aizen and acquire that mask. I should get into Tozen's backstory a bit, which was shown back in the Soul Society arc, but I didn't really get into it back then, but it's crucial to keep in mind during these chapters when trying to truly understand Tozen's betrayal. He had a woman, a Soul Reaper, that was important to him, and she was murdered by another Soul Reaper, and the Central 46 didn't really do enough about it. He really didn't like the way the system was going. That's all well and good. It makes sense. I understand why he would feel that way. And going back and rereading some of those pages after reading the current chapters, there are some definite little hints about the truth about Tozen in them and his real philosophy. One of the things that utterly fascinates me about Tozen being with Aizen at all is something that the story hasn't dived into much. Because of his blindness, Tozen was the only person in Soul Society that physically couldn't fall under Aizen's hypnosis. Obviously, he couldn't look at his sword. Recruiting Tozen to the cause just makes things infinitely easier for Aizen because he doesn't have to worry about the one guy that he couldn't use his sword to deceive. But it's also just very smart of Aizen because he obviously understands people. He understands motivations and he thinks a lot. And I'm sure he played to Tozen's anger toward the Soul Society and his resentment towards, their justice system, all to protect himself. Aizen probably could have killed Tozen just straight up, but he realized he could use this to his advantage and twist what was already there. I think the whole dynamic between Tozen and Aizen is very interesting. I would have loved to have seen more of them in, one-on-one scenes, just to get a bit more of that dynamic. But yeah, Tozen already had a bone to pick with the Soul Society, and Aizen just took advantage of that. What I loved about this fight for a character like Tozen, when you're facing a character like Tozen, where his philosophy is so emphasized, where he's so much about his beliefs and about making points about society as a whole and about the way the Soul Reapers work, a fight like that, I like that this fight becomes more about a couple of conversations than about the actual fighting itself. And these conversations paint a clear picture of how these former allies and friends ended up in this place as enemies. Hisagi and Komamura trusted Tozen, but we come to learn that they may not have known him nearly as well as they believed, not even at all in some ways. We get some good interaction between Hisagi and Tozen that expands on the lesson about fear that we heard Hisagi talk about before, how fear is important for a warrior to have. In Hisagi's case, Tozen taught him it was beneficial to have some fear of his own weapon, of his own power. But unfortunately, this conversation ends pretty abruptly, but I liked that Tozen has this new power, this hollow power with his mask, and he seems to just fully embrace it. He doesn't seem to fear it. He doesn't seem to, be cautious about it. He's just fully embracing this power, and Hisagi kind of points out, maybe you don't fear anything anymore. You might have forgotten your own lesson. Yeah, this whole part got a little scary though, because I really thought I was seeing Hisagi's death for a second. Like, that was really scary, and I'm glad he's okay. But for that one panel, I was like, oh no. But Tozin does admit that he does fear something, and he has for centuries. He can't stand the idea of really being a Soul Reaper, of assimilating with the rest of his former peers and dying as a Soul Reaper, as something that he despises, as a part of the system that he despises. And it seems that he's really just trying to stave off that fear by siding with Aizen and trying to kill the connections that might have made him, in his words, assimilate. There's so much to unpack, but Tozin and Komamura have an interesting discussion too about the idea of justice and what the difference is between virtue and justice. That sometimes the morally right thing to do is not actually going to bring justice at all. Tozin is very black and white. He doesn't believe exceptions should be made. He believes punishment should fit the crime, apparently. He's just very much about distributing justice, real justice, even if it doesn't seem like the merciful thing to do or the kind thing to do. Justice is justice in his eye. Because Tozin's whole life has been so defined by the loss of his friend and by the desire to avenge her, to seek true justice. Forgiving the Soul Society for their role in her death might be the righteous and the kind thing to do, but to him, moving on without getting proper retribution would be the actual injustice. The thing with Tozin is that I get where he's coming from, and I can understand how he became this way. Kubo did a great job of fleshing him out through these conversations and showing us, yeah, this is just where this guy stands. I don't think he's entirely wrong to want to avenge someone that meant so much to him, but I think playing this long game of pretending while secretly conspiring against people that he gained the trust of is the wrong way to go about all of it. I doubt that his friend would have wanted him to do any of this, but he's far beyond that point. Tozin is stuck, still being bitter and still being angry and still wanting that vengeance and wanting to punish the people that he thinks didn't actually distribute proper justice. And because they didn't do that, he views them as evil because they were unjust. Tozin is stuck. He did not allow himself to grow. He couldn't move on. And I really liked the visual of Tozin's mask cracking around his mouth. It not only looks really creepy, but there's something more to it too. To me, Tozin is one of the most steadfast characters in the series. He sticks to his code and his beliefs, having held on to them for a very long time, but now is able to actually speak them aloud, to tell everyone about what he really thinks. His viewpoint is just too powerful for the mass to contain. He wants to be heard, he wants people to listen, he wants them to know, this is why I'm doing this. This is justice. But at this point, it draws an emphasis to his eyes still being shrouded, still not able to see things in a new way, but instead only what he knows and what he preaches. It's just such an interesting debate about justice. I love stuff like this. I'm a big fan of Death Note, and my favorite thing about Death Note is that it's about justice, really. It's about what does justice mean. And this really leaned a lot into that. I loved seeing this conversation and understanding where Tozin was coming from. I don't agree with his methods, I don't agree with his decisions, and all of the awful things that have come from them. But I understand why he is the way he is, and Kubo did a great job of making it clear where the dividing line is between him and his fellow Soul Reapers. It's just fascinating stuff, I loved it. And then Tozin reveals his resurrection, and I was shocked that he even had one. It's the first time we've seen a holified Soul Reaper do it, unless that's what the monstrous Ichigo really was. Was that Ichigo's resurrection? He didn't say a word or anything, but it could be, I suppose. But this is the first time we've seen someone who's a Soul Reaper or a Visored explicitly say resurrection command and then transform into a more holified form. But yeah, do all Visored have this capability of having resurrections? Is Tozin just deeper into embracing his hollow side? Would that be the difference, that he's just more willing to lean into that power than, say, Shinji or Hiyori would be? Or maybe it's that Aizen taught him to control his holification differently than how the Visored had to learn. There's a lot of different potential factors and questions, and it's just crazy. I don't know, but I was shocked, and then even more shocked to see what this form looked like. At first, it's a little intimidating looking in the very beginning. When he's first transforming, it's like this black shroud and a mask in the middle, and it's a little scary looking. But then the design becomes very much like a giant bug, which isn't the first thing I would have imagined for a Tozen transformation, but in the end, honestly, it makes sense. It's really a shame that this design kind of ruins Tozen's perfect fit streak, but that's kind of the point. He always looks so cool, but now he's abandoning everything, even his fashion sense. I love that this is so ugly because it really projects what Tozen has become, or really always was on the inside. And he didn't want to be a Soul Reaper, and this makes him look nothing like a Soul Reaper anymore. It's so good. As hideous as it is, it really does work for the character in this moment. But yeah, he no longer looks like the sleek, cool character that I'm used to. But even that's not the biggest change for him, no. Because Tozen's eyesight is restored. The moment Tozen opens his new gigantic bug eyes to see for the first time is such an extremely powerful moment. In most circumstances, someone gaining sight and seeing the world should be a profoundly beautiful thing, miraculous even, and a reason to celebrate, but instead, it takes a truly heart-wrenching turn. Because Tozen knows how insecure Komamura has always been about his appearance. That was part of what made their relationship so touching, was that a blind man didn't care about Komamura's physical appearance. But now, when Tozen actually sees Komamura for the first time, he tells him that he's even uglier than he thought he would be. This panel right here of Komamura reacting to this, it's one of the biggest moments of like real betrayal in the series so far. Like what a low blow, and it's so heartbreaking. I just felt so bad here. Tozen was a guy that Komamura trusted above like most others, that he was most comfortable around, and seemed like a genuine best friend. Tozen seemed like someone that would never intentionally say anything to hurt him, especially about something that Komamura has obviously struggled with like his whole life. Part of their dynamic, the core of it, was that unlike everyone else, Tozen couldn't see Komamura's face, but you got the impression that even if he could see him, he wouldn't be cruel. But I was very, very wrong about that, I guess. Tozen says just the worst thing imaginable, and I wanted to start throwing hands. I'm not a Komamura fanboy really, but seeing him treated like this is tough. You can feel his hurt emanating off of the page. He probably wants nothing more than to put a mask over his head right there, and that hurts me. That's so, this poor guy. However, I don't entirely think Tozen's saying this, despite how scary he looks right here. I don't think it's coming from a place of pure malice. Tozen saying the thing that would hurt Komamura most is more complicated than it seems on the surface. Or maybe not. Maybe he is just a jerk that never actually cared about his friendship, or maybe the holification is corrupting him. But frankly, I think there's something deeper there. I think he's only saying this because he actually does care about Komamura, as messed up as that is. From my standpoint, if I had to take a guess, which I am going to do because I'm me, and this is a video where I talk about these things, if I had to take a guess, I would say that Tozen is trying really hard to separate himself from the genuine friendship and the bonds that he formed, to sever those connections and drive Komamura away. He wants his friend to hate him. Maybe because the friendship they formed makes Tozen's goal more difficult, or even worse, his friendship with Komamura and with Hisagi makes it possible that Tozen's greatest fear may come to pass. Remember, he's scared of assimilating with the Soul Reapers and dying as one when his goal was always to secretly get back at them. to seek justice against the people that wronged his friend. He doesn't want to truly be counted as a Soul Reaper, despite spending so much time rising through their ranks. His career there was just a means to a vengeful end. That was it. But maybe he did form actual connections with some people, real friendships that challenged his perception. So the only way to go through with hurting these people is to break those bonds. And there's a real tragedy to that, if that's the case, because Tozen's whole mindset was changed because a friend of his was hurt. And now he's willing to hurt people that also became his friends, because he, as I said, he never moved on. He's blinded by vengeance. He's blinded by his ideal of justice. And he's blinded by unwavering hatred, despite all of the good things that have come from his time with the Soul Reaper. I loved that what ended up defeating Tozen was a sneak attack that he didn't see coming, when Hisagi comes out of nowhere and stabs him with his blade. There's just something very poetic about Tozen gaining his eyesight, but still not seeing that attack coming. And I loved the sheer ferocity of Hisagi activating his Shikai while the blade was already in Tozen. Just brutal, but badass. Like, that's what I love about Hisagi. This guy's cool. He brought out the Grim Reaper scythe. Awesome. And then we get into Tozen's ending, and it is sadder than I thought I would have felt when he was, acting like such a jerk. Because I loved that he could still see in his final moments, even as he returned to his more natural state, and I appreciated Komamura's acknowledgement that their friendship had turned out to be superficial. So this was really the first time that they were actually getting to really know each other, in the middle of a fight to the death. And despite all of that, despite learning that Tozen wasn't who he thought he was, Komamura admitted that Tozen's death would leave a hole in his heart anyway. It was just so sad, but also kind of really nice of him to give Tozen that much grace and forgiveness. Because even if it was all an act, even if it was all fake, to Komamura, the acceptance he got from Tozen during that time was still real. That relationship was still real in a way. The memories are real. It's just such a profoundly beautiful moment. They know that the bond they shared wasn't what they thought it was, but when it comes down to it, even though Tozen was lying about his intentions, they helped each other. They learned from each other. That doesn't just go away because of Tozen's lies. Hisagi and Komamura did gain something from knowing Tozen, so his loss would still leave an absence in their lives. And then there was Tozen on the verge of death, wanting to look at Komamura and Hisagi while he could. He had never seen them before, so he was just enjoying the brief opportunity to perceive the world in an entirely new way. It was tragic, it was frustrating, it was tough to read some of these moments with Tozen acting this way, but at least they had a nice resolution. And then Tozen explodes. Yeah. And I'm sitting there like, how the hell did this just happen? Why did he spontaneously pop all of a sudden? What the hell is going on? And I'm still kind of like that. What a shocking moment. You could have had a nice a nice slow passing where Tozen's eyes closed for good, where the last things he saw in this life were his friends that he abandoned, but now were there for him at the very end. You could have had a nice moment like that, just some eyelids shutting. But no, he just suddenly pops in an explosion of blood. And yeah, how? What just happened? Did Aizen kill him somehow? It kind of looked like it since he was looking back and smirking, but maybe he was just reacting to it, which is almost worse. At least he gave Tozen the courtesy of turning around to see his death, I guess. That's an honor that he didn't give his top espada. But I don't know if he actually killed him or not, or if Komamura is just mad that Aizen wrapped Tozen up in all of this to begin with, but he obviously wants vengeance. My initial takeaway reading it is that Aizen somehow did something to kill him, but I'm not so sure that that's actually the case. Maybe this was just the holification that, messed with his body, it turned him into a bug. I'm sure that wasn't the most, like, stable biology, I guess. So this is probably the last we'll see of Tozen. It's a shame, but it was a nice way to close out his story. He was one of the more complex villains that we've seen in the series, thanks to how resolute he is, while also kind of, it seemed, to actually have genuine appreciation for the fake bonds that he made. Like, maybe there were more important things to him than justice. Tozen was blind, but it wasn't just his actual vision. His blindness went beyond his eyes. He was blinded by a need for retribution, an age-old grudge, and a desire for justice that no longer needed to be satiated. Maybe for himself so he could move on, but he was blinded by revenge when it comes down to it. It wasn't justice so much as revenge. And that's kind of a classic storytelling trope. You know, vengeance leads to bad places. You lose yourself. And Tozen lost himself, became unrecognizable, even to me as a reader, because if you had shown me that picture of Tozen as a bug, if you had just shown me that like a month ago, I probably wouldn't have thought, oh, it's Tozen. No, nope. So in tribute to Tozen's character, I am not going to give him his own funeral, but I am going to rank his looks, because Tozen had some of the best outfits in the series, at least so far. So I just want to pay some respect to how well this man dressed. This will not be a deep analysis. This is just pure style. Okay, last place is when he's a big-eyed bug, obviously. I love what it represented, as I talked about earlier, but part of what made it great is that it's hideous, it's not pleasant to look at. So, yeah, last place. Next to last is his flashback look. I can't go too hard on young Tozen for this. He just hadn't found his style yet. That's all. Next, we have his design from the Soul Society arc. That was a great look for him, extremely memorable, the kind of look you want when you're first introducing a character and you want him to stand out and be memorable for the reader. He just looks cool. Even when my wife first saw him, she said she wanted to dress like him. It just feels like a little bit warmer of a look, which is fitting considering at this point, Tozen is still treated as one of the good guys. He just looks like a cool good guy. Next, I have his Arrancar arc look. After he abandoned Soul Society and openly served Aizen, he's got his hair down and he's looking a bit freer, able to more openly be himself. There's something really powerful about this look that helped sell him being in his new position of authority. In second, I have his visored mask look, which is just the last look with a mask on. But I'm sorry, this absolutely deserved its own spot. I raved about it earlier in the video. Absolutely true that this may be the coolest that any of the people with hollow masks have looked. Sometimes less is more, and minimalism does work. It's just such a fittingly cold look, and I love it. It was so close to being number one. But my favorite Tozen design is from Turn Back the Pendulum, for no other reason than he just looks amazing. I love the mask that initially hid that it was Tozen, and then once he takes the top part off, I'm a sucker for masks that cover the bottom half of the face like that. It always looks cool. He's never looked more awesome than back then. Plain and simple, this is the coolest Tozen has ever looked and probably will ever look. It's the best. If I missed any designs, sorry. But those were the ones that came to mind. The more memorable ones. Maybe I missed one or two. I don't know. If I did, sorry. So R.I.P. Tozen. I wish you could watch Ichigo somehow defeat Aizen. Maybe then you would have seen what justice really looks like. Speaking of which, Ichigo's back, and I'm super excited. But we'll talk about that next time. Whew, this was a long one, guys. Way longer than I expected it to be, but I loved this fight. Yeah, this is gonna get crazy, and I can't wait to see Ichigo even just try to fight Aizen. As always, thanks so much for watching. Please comment, like, and subscribe. If you want to help support the channel a little bit extra, then we do have a membership option available. I'll see you guys all next time. Take care. Bye.